All right. So I think we're about at our time to get started. So I think let's do it. Great. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for spending your Sunday afternoon with us, and welcome to Spot On. It's fine. I'm fine. And hello to those of you out on Facebook Live. We're happy to have you here too. It's a new thing we're doing, which has been very successful so far. So excited about that. My name is Jess Chayes. I'm the Bold Associate Artistic Director at Northern Stage. It's wonderful to see everybody here. Some of you repeat Spot On guests, and some of you new. So I'm going to give a couple of just quick Zoom rules and a little bit of an introduction, and we'll get our conversation kicked off. So first of all, you're here, so you probably know that Spot On is our conversation series. It's free to everyone, and it aims to give greater context to the work that we put up on our main stage. So we try to give a little bit more depth to the topics that we discuss in the plays that we're doing. So that is why you're here today. Quick show of hands. So who has seen It's Fine, I'm Fine, either online or in person? Wonderful. So almost ever, I would say, okay, good. I'm getting an applause emoji too. So looks like most folks have seen it before, and we will try, there we go. Thank you, Eric. Started his video to vote. Great. So most of you here have seen it, and so we'll be going from there, though I promise we won't give any big spoilers, I hope. Great. So if you haven't seen it yet, we now have the streaming version available. You can go to our website, northernstage.org. And if you're an ensemble member, you can sign up for a link. You'll get a link to view it. And you can also buy tickets and encourage everyone, all of your friends, family, everyone you know, to buy tickets. They are very affordable, and that will give you a one-time streaming link so that you can see the show. And it's running through November 29th, so you've got some time. So please tell everyone. We also have opening, I believe it starts streaming November 12th. We have The Naked Librarian by our incredible local playwright, Marisa Smith, and On the Harmful Effects of Tobacco, which is a Chekhov one-act performed by the wonderful Gordon Clapp. So those will be available starting November 12th. So in terms of Zoom rules of the road, I think everyone knows what they're doing by this point. Everyone's kindly muted themselves. You can keep your video on if you want. We like to sort of see our guests if that's fun for you. And then when we have some participation later on, we will ask that you click the raise hand button, which you can find at the bottom. If you click participants at the bottom of your screen, then there's a raise hand button on the bottom left. Also, you can probably, Kerrigan will help me out, and if you want to raise your hand physically, we'll probably be able to catch you. And lastly, you'll probably want to put yourself in speaker view so that you can see the folks who are presenting, though you can also check out gallery view as well to see everyone. So I'm going to just briefly introduce our incredible guests who will talk a little bit more about Steph Everett's It's Fine, I'm Fine. So first of all, we are so lucky to have Dr. Diane Roston. She's the medical director for West Central Behavioral Health, the nonprofit community mental health center for Sullivan County, Lower Grafton County, and the Upper Valley. Dr. Roston is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth. And just for a little bit about West Central Behavioral Health, it's an incredible organization that ensures access to advanced counseling, treatment, and support for people of all ages, regardless of their ability to pay. So something very crucial in this moment. I also want to introduce our second special guest, Tyler Maland, who is the Chief Impact Officer at the Concussion Legacy Foundation. So he leads strategy and execution on all programs and communications for the Concussion Legacy Foundation, a nonprofit founded in 2007 that's leading the fight against concussions and chronic traumatic encephalopathy. I said that okay? And is dedicated to improving the lives of those impacted. So he's been there for 6 years and has built programs for athletes, for military veterans, for patients and their families who are suffering from the effects of brain trauma. And I learned in his bio, he's a native of Vermont. So welcome back in a way to Vermont.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited.
That's amazing. Great. And then lastly, I want to also, though she needs a little introduction, reintroduce our incredible playwright and performer, Steph Everett, who wrote and performed in It's Fine, I'm Fine, which was developed here at Northern Stage during her Dartmouth experiential term, went on to win the Best Newcomer Award at the United Solo Festival, in New York, and then as you all know, has come home for a victory run here at Northern Stage this fall as one of the only indoor theater pieces in the country. So we've had an incredible experience working with her. Steph has also been in multiple other Northern Stage productions, such as The Little Mermaid and Citrus. So Steph was actually in the last play to happen at the Barrett Center before the pandemic, and then opened the theater back up. So I think that is a beautiful thing. So welcome, Steph, as well. She'll be one of our guests. So I think just to sort of get us kicked off, so I'm going to ask a few questions and then we'll open it up to you to ask your questions. But first of all, I'm just curious to hear some responses to the play, maybe. I know Diane and Tyler, you both got to watch it over the weekend, and I'm curious what resonated. What did it make you think? You know, anyway, just some of those thoughts off the bat, if you don't mind.
Sure, I can go first. I mean, I think, obviously I think about the play and what was in it through the lens of working where I work, right? So we see so many patients who are struggling with concussion or post-concussion syndrome. And by the way, we first came into contact with Steph because she published a story on our website talking about her experience with post-concussion syndrome. And for me, watching the play and knowing how successful it's been and how it's making the rounds just makes me so glad, because I think a lot of people don't realize how much folks who are struggling with their symptoms and with their, maybe prolonged recovery from a brain injury, how much those people are looking for stories from people who, went through something like them. They're looking for some hope. They're looking for, some sort of an artistic expression or, some sort of explanation from someone else that's recognizable, right? That says, I went through this and I know that you may have also. So for me, and, we shared this with our constituency, with our audience, and I think some people watched it as well. That was my number one takeaway, is just knowing how much this means to people who have gone through it or who are going through it right now. And knowing that obviously it'll live on and now it's on video and all that stuff. I mean, just, my heartfelt applause and also sort of gratitude towards Steph for making this something that really connects with a lot of people.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I really enjoyed watching it. And a couple of thoughts I had. One is the powerful language and the descriptions that Steph used about this condition, the brain fog and the pressure in the head and the confusion, really, I think, expressed what so many people experience with post-concussive syndrome. I have to say, I got a chuckle or two about the portrayals of people in my field, in the mental health field. And I like to think that that we all have a good sense of humor about that. But I also appreciated how powerful the influence of healthcare professionals can be on somebody going through this condition. And I think that really came through loud and clear, and I really appreciated that.
Great. Thank you both so much. Yeah, I just do that. That was a bonus question. I was just so curious since you've been watching the show. Great. So first question, yeah, for both of you. Steph talks in her play, about this real endless quest for treatment and answers after her series of concussions. And I'm curious, what is it that makes this particular injury so mysterious and difficult to treat?
Maybe I'll start this one off. I've taken care of a number of people with this condition. It is very difficult to start with. It's very difficult to diagnose. It's invisible. It's not like a broken leg where you can take an X-ray and you can see the test results and confirm your diagnosis. It's variable within the same person from one day to the next. It's variable from person to person. So it's really a masquerader, and it often gets misdiagnosed as migraine headache or fibromyalgia or depression, or God forbid that it's all in your head and you're just making it up. It's a very, very difficult condition to diagnose. And then once the diagnosis is made, it's hard to treat because the brain heals slowly. Like a bruise on the skin, it heals in its own time. And so in a way, there's really no rushing the healing process, and there's no treatment that's targeted specifically to this whole syndrome. So treatments end up targeting specific symptoms, target headaches or pain or depression or anxiety or difficulty focusing, but there really isn't any adequate medicine per se. Rehabilitation model, I think, is really helpful for lots of people, but it's very difficult to diagnose and very, very difficult to treat.
Yeah, I would essentially echo everything Dr. Roston said. I mean, I think the two things that jump out to me most, she mentioned both of them. Number one, the invisible nature of the injury makes it so much more difficult to diagnose. And then number two, just the fact that no two concussions are the same, and no two recovery processes are the same. So, you know, there really is no perfectly scripted playbook to have a successful recovery from this injury. You know, different people with different symptoms react differently to different treatments. Sometimes the perfect treatment for one person doesn't work at all for another, because they just have slightly different symptoms or a slightly different injury or slightly different course of recovery. So, you know, I think that's really the crux of it, is that everything is variable and nothing is easily scanned. And then you have the factual, okay, this is what happened. You know, it can really manifest differently for different people.
And even for the same person, I might add, it can manifest differently, because the first two concussions that I got better once I started doing exercise again, because it helped just like the flow of everything in returning to normal. And so like biking and short jogs helped me. And then the third time we thought it'd be the exact same. So I started doing aerobic exercise, and I woke up the next morning and like knew that my career was over. It just made it so much worse. So it's hard even from one to the next within the same person to know what to expect.
Yeah, wow. Thank you. Yeah, great. Yeah. So my next question is, you know, and this is sort of, I think, very much the overarching theme of this panel maybe, is that there seems to be, you know, a really clear connection between concussions and mental health symptoms in a number of different ways. So I'm curious, you know, what you have observed in terms of the connection between these two things, and what are the best forms of support that you can give someone who's going through this? So that's my next.
Do you want to start that one off, Tyler?
Why don't you start, and then I'll fill in the gaps
All
from
right,
from a non-doctor's perspective.
All right, fair enough. There are two ways that I think about this. One is that the brain injury itself affects parts of the brain that affect emotions, cognition, focus, problem solving. And so depending on where the concussion happens and what part of the brain is injured, there can be emotional symptoms of that. For example, if the frontal lobe in the front gets injured, person has difficulty with judgment or managing emotions or planning. If it's really a hard injury, the deeper structures like the limbic system, the amygdala, which regulate emotions, can be injured as well, and that can really cause changes in mental state. And then there's the emotional, so there's the brain injury part. This is a brain injury, it's a brain disease. And then there's the emotional impact of the losses and the pain and the headache and the debility that are caused by this condition. And those lead to, can lead to depression, anxiety, hopelessness, helplessness, suicidal thoughts, as we saw in Steph's performance. And these are the secondary sequelae of, of the impact of this brain injury initially.
Yeah, I think one thing to add on to that, it's a great description of sort of what is happening inside the brain and how those things can, overlap with mental health symptoms. I think another thing to keep in mind, the CDC estimates over 3 million concussions happen every year in sports and recreation. Who are the folks who are most commonly participating in sports and recreation? It's children, it's teenagers. And so at the same time as you're having this physical brain injury and maybe some of these mental health symptoms like Dr. Roston just described, then think about what the brain is already doing for that teenager. It is growing so quickly, and already there are often a lot of, emotional growth. There's often a lot of cognitive growth. And so that's one of the things we see frequently is, oftentimes, especially post-concussion syndrome, just because of the ages of the folks who get it, it is often teenagers and, folks in their young 20s, college students. And those people are going through rapid mental development already. And so when you add on this really tough, first of all, physical injury, that then causes mental symptoms, number two. And then number three, often it causes isolation. It causes you to be held out of your things that are such a fabric of your identity, your sports, your activities, your friend groups, going to the movies, hanging out with your family. It's no wonder that these mental health symptoms can really appear, because it's a physical injury that causes mental health symptoms. And then it causes such a change in lifestyle that can be really tough, especially for young people.
Great, thank you. Yeah. So sorry, that's 3 million. That's a lot of that was
Yeah.
it just private chatted me that question, and you answered.
Yeah, I think their estimate is 2.6 to 3.8. It's something like that. So it's a lot, million.
There's a lot of people going through this. Thank you. Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah. Great. So this is a question for Tyler specifically, and a little bit about the Concussion Foundation. So what do you recommend? As you said, there's so many per year. What do you recommend for someone who has recently been concussed, for the patient and also for their friends and family? And can you also tell us a little bit about the CLF helpline that can be folded into, potentially folded into it, which is an incredible project of the Concussion Legacy Foundation?
Sure, yeah. So for immediate response to a concussion, there are very simple and very important things that are needed. Number one is immediate removal from whatever activity might have caused the concussion, and removal from that activity going on, before those symptoms have cleared. So, if you got it playing a sport, if you got it playing soccer, you don't want to go in the next day just because you think you should, or because your teammates think you should. So removal is really important, and then actually getting treated, seeing a medical professional for that injury is the really important kind of first simple but crucial steps that are sometimes missed. One thing I'll mention with that, it is very important for people who have suffered a concussion to try to do the right thing, right? You want to raise your hand and say, hey, I think I have this injury, a brain injury. I think maybe I need to remove myself from play or from activity. I think maybe I need to see a doctor. All those things are important, but you're also talking about somebody who just suffered a brain injury. And so that really reveals how important that close social circle is for that person. Can their friends speak up about it? Can their family speak up about it to give them that support that they need to take the right steps immediately after an injury? So We have a program called Team Up, Speak Up, where we encourage teammates to speak up when they're on the field and they think a teammate might have suffered a concussion, because, you know, the person who suffered the concussion might want to push through that injury. And they also, again, they have a brain injury. They might not know that they are injured. So we really talk about that close social circle being really important immediately after the injury. And then, yeah, Jess, then there's sort of that second phase of the injury. Most concussions do clear up, you know, within a week or two, but there are a significant portion that do not, like we know with Steph's story and many others. So we do have a program called the CLF Helpline, and I'll link it in the chat here when I have a second, but it's a program we started about 1.5 years ago to help patients and families who are really struggling with that recovery. So again, most people don't need us. It clears up within a week or two. But for those where the symptoms are lingering, they're not sure what to do. They went to this doctor and he said it wasn't even post-concussion syndrome. You know, they tried these 3 treatments and none of them worked. We hear that a lot. And so, you know, we are in a unique position where we've got a long list of doctors with experience. And we do have some really strong referrals and advice we can give. So we have this helpline where people can just type in their information, tell us what happened in a brief way, and we're going to get back to them very quickly. You know, with a medical referral, with some resources that they can read about what they might be going through. And then one of the unique things about the program is we also match mentors. So, you know, we've got a whole bunch of people who maybe suffered PCS, post-concussion syndrome, 1 year or 2 ago. They got through it, maybe with our help, and now they want to pay that forward. So we will match those people with someone who's going through the injury right now, so they can tell them, okay, these are some of the things that worked for me. You know, stay calm, stay hopeful. I know it's bad right now, but it's going to clear up. Here's what happened in my case. We do that with both, you know, patients and family members. Like we have parent mentors. So that's been a really successful part of this program. And again, like that concept, of hope is so important in this recovery, because sometimes you don't know when, you don't know when that light at the end of the tunnel is going to come. And so having a community to help you is really important. So we've tried to do that through the helpline.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes, and as Steph was observing a few days ago, we are in a region where sports are, very a really important part of our lifestyle and culture. So I'd say that's a great resource for, we probably know more people than we think who have had kids who have gone through this themselves. So I think a really important thing to keep in mind, especially if it doesn't clear up after seeing a medical professional. Thank you. And this is for Diane. So we're very lucky to have the West Central Behavioral Health Center very close by in the Upper Valley, and we're so grateful to have you here with us today. So this is on topic, but less a little bit outside of the scope of just post-concussive syndrome. But as you said, the play really does take seriously the role of mental health professionals and of getting help when you need it for all sorts of invisible struggles, as Steph likes to say. So I'm curious, what you're observing. This is really a time of crisis and pandemic, and I'm curious what you're observing in this area. And do you have any tips for folks who are suffering during this very difficult and uncertain time?
Yeah, great question. I was thinking about the parallels between post-concussive syndrome and the impact it has on changing a person's life completely from what it was before. And I think we've all experienced the impact of the pandemic on our lives. Some of us have lost loved ones. Some of us have lost our health, our jobs, our financial security, our housing. And it's interesting that some people who haven't lost any of those things also suffer from guilt because they haven't lost all those things, and also from the isolation that we all experience at this time. Since the COVID pandemic began, the rates of depression and anxiety and post-traumatic stress and alcohol problems and drug problems have risen dramatically. And also the rate of suicide has risen dramatically. And unfortunately, even in our Upper Valley community, we have had more losses, more deaths to suicide in the last several months than in any period of time that I know of before that, all in such a short time. So I wish I had an idea about exactly what can be done about this, but I'll have a couple of thoughts. One ties in with what Tyler was just saying that has to do with hope. And I think to remember for ourselves and each other that we human beings have gotten through the 1918 Spanish flu and all kinds of terrible things, and we've survived. And so keeping hope alive, I think, is really central to moving through this very, very dark, difficult time. Like what Tyler said, it's important to know that you're not alone, that we're all getting through this together. A heavy burden is lighter if it's shared over many people's shoulders. And so staying connected with family, with friends, with healthcare professionals, with other people that you do activities with, these are all very, very important. And also to really access resources if you need them. We know that, as they say, help is only a phone call away. Here's my plug for West Central. Harrigan, maybe you can post this on the chat also, that West Central has an emergency services number that's available 24/7, 1-800-546-2578. It's staffed by professional clinical social workers, and a really useful resource for our community. There also are other local hotlines. There is a national suicide hotline and other national resources. And then just a mention about when stress levels are high, basic self-care becomes even more important. This is the mama part of me coming out, eat and sleep and exercise, and be sure to stay connected with people and get fresh air. These become much more essential when our bodies are shooting out a lot more adrenaline in response to stress. The other thing is that sometimes routine helps to navigate through stress. So some people find it useful to have a regular kind of a rhythm and schedule, a regular bedtime, a regular time to get up, meal times. These things can easily get lost in a pandemic. If it feels like it's too much, if it feels unbearable, and you start to have thoughts about feeling hopeless and thinking about ending your life, tell someone, tell anyone, and then that person tells someone else. And if you're worried about someone else who might be suicidal, ask them directly, and then help them get connected to help. These are trying times for all of us, and we don't want to do it alone. And so if I have any message, that's the biggest message, and I think it parallels Tyler's message and Steph's message, that these are hard things to bear on one's shoulders by oneself.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it is so powerful that we're in this together. Yeah, now is the time we can lean on our community. Thank you so much. And so a couple questions for Steph, and then we'll open it up. So Steph, I'm curious, we were just talking about support systems. What have been the most impactful support systems for you in this journey with PCS? And is there anything that you wished you had known when you started out this journey?
Yep, I'm muted. Okay. I think my a cappella group was the biggest source of support, because I wasn't really allowed to be in it, and I could never talk about it because, God forbid, anyone on a sports team had any other interest. But they were so flexible, and they just saw me through every single thing I went through at Dartmouth, including leaving the team, and threw a party for me when I left. so just having that group of people, and like my true lifelong friends, I didn't meet till my junior fall and like my sophomore winter because I'd been so pigeonholed on the soccer team. And so those people that I met halfway through my college experience, like really pulled me through. And I guess my parents to a certain extent, because they put a lot of pressure on me that stressed me out a lot, but also really pushed me to go see the 8, 9, 10, 11th doctor, etc. Because every time you prep to go see someone, there's so much hope that you build up. There's so much wait time because you have to schedule an appointment with a doctor, then get a referral. And like any one specialist takes weeks and weeks and weeks to go through. So it just really adds up. So I was lucky to have them sort of always needling me and reminding me to get those things done. What I had known, I guess I wish I would have had a different perspective on college soccer and what it was. And I wish I'd had my coaches especially be more honest with me, because I think as time has gone on, I've realized that I was never going to be the star goalie on the team. I think they were really hard on me for my grades in a way that they weren't on other teammates. And I think that's because I brought the team average up, and they were really hard on me to get back to playing. But I think because when I was out, they didn't have a second goalie for practice. So I've like been able to piece things together looking back on it now that I'm separated from it, that like, I just wish I had known how dishonest some organizations can be, and how like the needs of the player as a person are not always put in front of the needs of the team and the school they represent and the funding that they need to get from the team. So yeah, I just had a very warped idea of my position in the world at that point. And I think it might have affected how much I pushed myself to get back when I wasn't ready.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I'm going to ask you one other just little bonus question, just since you just came off stage from your final performance. So, I mean, I know you probably expound on this, but just, give us a few thoughts. What was it like to do indoor theater when nobody else is, and to tell this story during this time? I'm just curious, were there moments that sort of spark for you, especially from the run?
Yeah. I think the 4th night of shows. So I've only ever gotten to do this show for one night at a time, whether it was at New Works Now, at Dartmouth, or in New York. It was just a one night only type thing. And in those circumstances, I was so nervous about just like remembering the words and like making script edits that I never really enjoyed them. So by the time we got to live shows here, I'd already performed it more than I ever had in my whole life. So I was finally able to like have fun with the jokes, and like interact with the audience, which was cool. And then I also like writing this show was the way that I finally dealt with a lot of things that I didn't deal with before, and hadn't put into words before. So it really started to hit me night after night, like, wow, I'm really saying these things, and wow, I really went through this, and wow, I'm really in a different place now. It feels so foreign to me, these things that I'm like throwing my body around the ground for, almost like in disbelief that I was there at one point and that I am not anymore. I think that was my biggest realization going through it night after night.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah. Such a wonderful show. Great. So let's open it up to the group. So yeah, I'd say if you can see the raise hand button on Zoom, use that, or raise your actual hand and we'll find you. Okay, Bob, I think you're first. Go ahead.
I'm curious to ask, when someone has a concussion or a series of concussions, medically, are brain scans capable of defining the impact and making them evident so that physicians aren't, oh, it's just in your head, you're not, I mean, dismissive. That must be the most difficult thing for a patient to experience, to feel like they're being dismissed from a medical person for a reality in their life. But I'm curious to know whether, I mean, I had a concussion and a skull fracture later on in life, and there was graphic imaging on the brain scans that showed what the problem was. But this is, I guess, not always true. Help me understand that, Diane. I don't know whether.
Yeah, that's a great question, Bob. Typically, brain scans are normal. There are exceptions to that. If there's some kind of a bleed, like a subdural hematoma, for example, that shows up on a brain scan. But typically, just the bruising that happens with a concussion does not show up on a scan. There is some work being done using what's called functional MRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, that looks at the flow and the function of the brain, that suggests that there may be some way to pick up these abnormalities with functional evaluation, but not with just a standard MRI or standard head CT scan, unfortunately, because it would make it a whole lot easier to diagnose if there were something that showed up.
But is the functional scan, is that going to be the standard of care when someone has?
I mean, Tyler, you might know more about this than I do. I hope so. I mean, there are all kinds of scans like that that are being studied that are going to give us much more capacity to evaluate brain function. So I would hope something like that would be universally available. But to my knowledge, at least in standard procedure, it's not automatically standard procedure at this point.
So something has to be said about that, loud and clear.
Yeah, I basically don't have anything to add there, Dr. Roston. There is definitely not yet a standard scan that can just be relied upon to make these diagnoses, which makes it so tough.
Yeah, I got a functional MRI 2.5 years into it. And was even told going into it and spending all that money that it probably wouldn't show anything, but it might, which is like another one of those lines that I say over and over is maybe, just maybe, it'll work. But yeah, my brain came back and it looked perfect. And I was like, oh, it's cute, but also that kind of sucks. It doesn't show anything's wrong.
Wow. Yeah, thanks. Pete or Ruth, or both of you at the same time, you're next.
Okay, I have two comments. The first one is that Brooke Adler and I are both board members of West Central. And it's so great to have Diane here today. And the other thing is, after we saw the show, I felt Ruth and I were very fortunate because we have a granddaughter who played volleyball in high school. And she also had 3 concussions over a 2-year period. And she had headaches and things, but nothing as severe as Steph went through. And she quit. She quit playing volleyball. And
well, the doctor told her that you really can't do this anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it.
She has it.
Great. Thank you. I think next we have Larry's iPad, and then I have a question from John Snell that I'll read after that.
It's actually Larry's iPad, but Sheila's speaking.
Great.
At any rate, just when you described your post-injury experience, you talked about the lack of honesty from the coach. And there were certain things he could have said that would have made your life at that point perhaps a bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share those with us? If not all, could you tell us some that might have been helpful?
Yeah, so I had always sort of been uncertain of my position on the team because I played men's baseball mostly, all the way through my last day of high school. And I was just like, I've always been an athlete. What is a sport I could do? And I'd always played soccer. And so I reached out to the soccer coach and was like, do you take walk-ons? I ended up being their I don't know if I was the first walk on, but I was definitely their only walk on. And so I always had that sort of sense of like, did you take me because you needed like an extra body? Or did you take me because you actually saw that I was good at what I was doing? So there was always just a little bit of a lack of clarity there. And then my first hit actually came from the assistant coach who was sort of goofing off at the end of practice one day and hit me while I was getting water off to the side. He was just shooting balls randomly and missed and hit me in the side of the head. And it was never talked about. They never took responsibility for it. It was really unfortunate because the soccer team was like a place that a lot of girls felt really safe and supported. And I just always sort of felt like an outcast and was never really told my place on the team. Yeah. I think if I had known from my freshman year that I wouldn't play a single game, I probably still would have stayed, but I wouldn't have pushed myself like I did.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that sort of dovetails, and maybe we can like open this out a little bit to a question that John Snell just wrote in, which is how often are coaches part of the problem, I guess. I'm curious if that is this like a typical story that you see a lot, or is it very case by case? I'm sure that's probably true, but what do you guys think?
Tyler, do you have thoughts? I feel like you talk.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say is that, you know, in our world, you know, obviously football gets a ton of media, a ton of attention on this issue, concussions and also CTE. We are often focused on youth and high school sports, even though higher levels get more attention. And where I'm going with this to answer your question is that in the NFL now, they have made a ton of rule changes to completely remove the coaching staff from any decisions having to do with return to play from concussion, removal from the game because of a concussion. Because, you know, and this isn't only true for the highest levels of sports, the coach's interests are not always perfectly aligned with the athlete's interests. And that's what Steph is talking about. And so that's a lot harder to do at the college level or even at the high school level when you just don't have as many resources. You can't have an independent medical person, you know, on hand at all times to help sort these things out. And so, you know, of course, I think generally most coaches have good intentions, want the best for their players. But A, there are exceptions, and B, there are times when, you know, that coach just simply has something else in the forefront of their mind, and the proper treatment of their athlete may become secondary. And so I do think it's definitely a consistent issue. And again, that's why like that close social circle of support, the athlete's parents, the athlete's close friends, becomes so important in situations like this. Because if they don't step in, and especially teammates, I would say, if they don't step in, that's when someone can become ostracized or feel like they are no longer part of the team. I played college basketball Division III, and we had a guy who kind of missed it was about a month straight because of a concussion. And we were a little bit in the dark. We didn't know what was going on, and he wasn't allowed to come to practice. And so those are kind of tense moments when it's a really important thing to have the team, the coach, the fellow players behind that athlete rather than making that athlete feel separated because of what they're going through.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's complicated. Any final questions, comments? Jim, go ahead.
Since I was a kid and playing sports, I've watched over the years lots of sports start to have helmets and other protective gear. Baseball, ice hockey, skiing, lots of sports. And I'm just wondering because I don't see any change in protective gear at all for soccer.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, there are like those chunky concussion like headband type things that a lot of players have started wearing, but I actually think a lot of the problem comes from our expectations of women and their bodies, and this sort of unspoken rule that women shouldn't be lifting and shouldn't be
You're muted, Steph.
oh my god. Just fully started talking.
No,
You didn't hear any of that. Okay, cool.
we saw most of it. We heard most of it. It just muted quickly after you said women shouldn't be lifting.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. It's just there was such like on a collegiate level we were lifting 4 times a week, but I'd look at my teammates and they were doing sort of the bare minimum because they didn't want to become like really bulky or really whatever. But I think you see higher numbers in women's sports because we're not taking care of our bodies that way. So whiplash, we're a lot more susceptible to whiplash. We're a lot more susceptible to these injuries because it's sort of looked down upon for women to be strong in that way. And so I think even just as simple as parents like telling their kids that like it's okay to be strong, and like that sort of conditioning that we get from such an early age to look a certain way could be super helpful. But in terms of gear, I don't know how much we could really do to enforce.
Yeah, and I would just add that helmets and protective gear for the head, for the most part, is a great answer for skull fractures, but not such a great answer for concussion. I think most of the research says that protective equipment can maybe marginally help prevent concussion a little bit, but it's not at all what we think it is. And so you sort of get into a danger there where you feel safer than you really are. A concussion, when you think about concussions that happen in soccer, a lot of times it's maybe collisions with a goalie, or oftentimes it's collisions in the air where two people are going up for a header. For the most part, that skull cap or whatever is not going to protect you when you go head to head. That's going to be dangerous no matter what's on your head because of the acceleration and deceleration and the collision.
I have a couple of quick things to add. I think about post-concussive syndrome and head injury as a brain bruise. And just like if you had something covering your leg and you got a hard whack on it, you would get bruised even if there was something covering the external surface. And so that's how I think about that. And then as we're talking about sports injuries and how important they are, particularly in our young athletes, I also want to be sure to include in the frame that these injuries also happen to people outside of sports, and young people are vulnerable, older people are vulnerable. I've seen people who have had traumatic brain injuries from their head getting slammed in a door, or ski injuries, or falls, or other kinds of things that aren't directly related to a sports team. And so we keep in mind all of that as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, this time passed very quickly. I mean, for me, I hope for you as well, because this is all fascinating and amazing. So I think we're going to wrap up now, but thank you so much to Dr. Diane Roston and to West Central Behavioral Health, an incredible organization that I now know much more about and that we all know about and should avail ourselves of. And also to Tyler Maland and the Concussion Legacy Foundation, an incredible organization that Steph has been connected with. We're so grateful for having you with us. And Steph Everett and your beautiful show. Thank you for coming to the Upper Valley this fall. And for gracing us with your incredible story and being so open and vulnerable with us in all of these conversations and in the show itself. And also a big thanks to Kerrigan Quinneman, our Bold Artistic Fellow, for producing this series, doing a beautiful job. So thank you. And to lastly, to all of you for being here and spending your afternoon with us.
What's next for Stephanie?
Thank you so much. What's next for Stephanie?
Stephanie is sneaking across the Canadian border next week to see a head specialist. So everyone send some good vibes.
You're still dealing with the injury.
I am 4.5 years
Oh,
later,
I'm
but
so
this could
sorry.
be the one.
Yes, maybe.
The,
maybe.
the Canadian border is a pretty big one. Where are you going?
British Columbia.
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
Good
Mhm.
luck.
Thank you.
We wish you well, Steph. Take care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks for joining us.